That'd be great. Great. Well, I've called this morning's word "Getting Your Vision Back." And Jane and I, we see things quite differently. And I'm not talking about the fact that I wear glasses and she doesn't. When she goes into a room, maybe, and looks at even like my side of the bedroom, she will see a sock there, maybe a plate there, something there, and whereas when I go in, I'm like, oh, it looks great, So she said, now, I'm going to give you a little mental exercise, a recommendation of how you can improve your seeing. So if, like me, your eyesight isn't very good, then, this is for us as well. So here's the exercise. Imagine you've been out of maybe work for the day, and you've got back, while you're out, you've paid someone to come and clean your room. Okay, imagine your bedroom maybe. You've come and then what you need to do is go and look and see that room, imagining that you have paid someone to do it. Because apparently that when, maybe this is a man thing, but when we pay for something, then we expect a certain level of service. So I thought, that sounds like a good exercise. So I got back, there I was, at the bedroom door, envisaging the room has been cleaned. So I've paid someone. So then I open the door. I look at my side of the room, and I think, fire that person. Get rid of them. because I realize I'm that person, you see? And you're like, so maybe that's a little mental exercise. Next time you go home, you can imagine, I've paid someone. And then you think, wow, I can do a better job than this. Anyhow, why do I share that story? Well, because this morning's word is all about seeing. What do we see? And it's not as though I was blind, but I couldn't see what was in front of my eyes. And this morning, the Pharisees couldn't see what was in front of their eyes. The disciples couldn't see what was in front of their eyes. And then there was one other person, a blind person. They clearly couldn't see what was in front of their eyes, but they could by the end of the story. So I want to start thinking, and I guess what we're thinking about is, what are you seeing? Because if you see Christ clearly, you will see everything else differently. You'll see everything differently. Well, let's pick up the story. We're in Mark chapter 8. If you've got your Bibles there, you're welcome to turn to them. Let me read these verses. During those days, another large crowd gathered. Since they had nothing to eat, Jesus called his disciples to him and said, I have compassion for these people. They have already been with me 3 days and have nothing to eat. If I send them home hungry, they will collapse on the way, because some of them have come a long distance. His disciples answered, but where in this remote place can anyone get enough bread to feed them? How many loaves do you have? Jesus asked. 7, they replied. He told the crowd to sit down on the ground. When he had taken the 7 loaves and given thanks, he broke them and gave them to his disciples to distribute to the people. And they did so. They had a few small fish as well. He gave thanks for them also and told the disciples to distribute them. The people ate and were satisfied. Afterward, the disciples picked up 7 basketfuls of broken pieces that were left over. About 4,000 were present. Now, some of you who are new here, I met Humphrey on the way in. I know this is your second Sunday, Humphrey. You're thinking, wow, this is a new story. Whereas for other of you who've been or here already in the Gospel of Mark, you're thinking, I thought we had this story 2 months ago. Didn't we already hear about this feeding of people? Well, we see that it's not just one story, but there are 2 stories in the Gospel of Mark where the people get fed by Jesus. Great crowds get fed by Jesus. Now, some what I call foolish theologians think, this didn't really happen twice. basically only happened once, and for some reason it ended up there twice. And I'm like, I don't think Mark was dumb. There's a reason that these stories are there twice. And you might be thinking, well, why was it there twice? Well, firstly, we know that the disciples did not understand the first lesson. And so like any good teacher, if the pupil does not understand, the lesson needs to be retaught. But also secondly, this second time occurred in a very different place. So if you remember back a couple of months ago, we talked about how this occurred in the north. They reckon it was probably Bethsaida where this happened in that region. And so we knew that there was a Jewish crowd there. Whereas this second time, it was in the region of the Decapolis. Now that's important because that region was predominantly non-Jews, those who were Gentiles. Now why is that important? Well, if you remember last week, for those of you who were here, Ike was sharing about that story of the woman who was also a Gentile and who'd come to Jesus asking for healing. And basically she had said, well, listen, even I, as a non-Gentile, even I deserve to get the crumbs under the table. Again, I'm not going to go into that story again. And, some of you who are here were thinking, well, Jesus spoke pretty harshly to her because he was saying, let the children eat first. And oh, you guys can only, do you really deserve this stuff? And if you're thinking, was Jesus fair? The very next story that comes is he goes and feeds all the Gentiles, all this big crowd of Gentiles. You see, and what does that tell us? It says he came for the Jews, he came for the Gentiles. He came for the Greeks, he came for you, he came for me, whatever your nationality, whatever your age, he came for you. And all ate and all were satisfied. Now, one of the reasons also why this story occurs twice is because it is super important. It gets to the heart of why Jesus has come. If you remember, in Mark 6, it said, taking the 5 loaves and 2 fish, looking up to heaven, he gave thanks, he broke the loaves, and he gave it to his disciples. In what we've just read here, we see the very same thing. When he had taken the 7 loaves, he gave thanks, he broke them, and he gave them to his disciples. And then we see right at the end of Mark's gospel, these very same words. Jesus took bread, and when he had given thanks, he broke it and gave it to his disciples. But there's one other thing which is added, saying, take it, this is my body. You see, what these stories are, this isn't just some feeding miracle, like happy hour with Jesus, where you can get free bread and free fish. This story is there because he is trying to show his mission, which is he is the bread that's come down from heaven. He lived his life in thanksgiving, and he was going to die on his cross. His body was going to be broken. Why? So that it could be offered to the world, offered to you, offered to me. Take it. This is my body. And in both these stories, both the Jews and the Gentiles ate and were satisfied. Now you might be thinking, well, that's great, but that happened 2,000 years ago. What's that got to do with me? It's great. It's a great story, but actually I want proof. I want God to show himself. I need a sign that he's there. And if he wrote his name in the cloud, my name in the clouds, then I trust it. Then I know it would be real. This is too long ago. I want God to prove himself. If he deposits maybe 1,000 euros in my bank account, I know you're probably thinking you want another zero right now. Maybe 2 more zeros if you're feeling greedy. Then I will believe. Well, I remember growing up, I didn't believe in God at all. I grew up as an atheist. And so I remember one time I used to cycle. I used to do a lot of cycling because my parents didn't like taking me places. And hey, you've got a bike? Get on your bike, son. Go and use your bike. And often that would mean cycling at night, and we lived in the middle of nowhere. So often you would have to cycle, 15 minutes in this dirt track. Now, I had rechargeable batteries in my bike, and like a normal teenage boy, I always forgot to recharge these batteries. And so I remember one time, It was pitch black, no moon, you couldn't see anything. And I just about got to the place where it became, the dirt track. And the batteries suddenly went out. And I thought, right, this is where I'm going to test if God really exists. Because I'm going to say to him, basically, now you've got a chance to show yourself to me. Because if you can make these lights work, then I will believe in you. And if you don't, well, you can't be there. Okay? So if you can make these lights work. Now, I've got a question for you. What do you hope happens in this story? You've got a choice. Either you can hope that the lights come on, or you can hope the lights don't come on. Okay? So, let's see. Who votes that the lights don't come on in this story? Let's see. Any hands up? Okay. Okay, right. Who votes that the lights come on in this story? Who is too tired to put their hand up in this? Okay. Well, let me put you out of your misery. The lights didn't come on. Now, some of you who voted for them coming on, now you're feeling disappointed. You're thinking, what's the use of sharing this story? Well, let me tell you, as I've looked back, I was super thankful that those lights didn't come on. And let me tell you why. You see, because firstly, what would it have taught me about God? It would have basically told me that God was someone who I could tell what to do. I could basically make a deal with God, and he was going to do it for me. And so the next time something happened, I could say, well, now, God, you've shown yourself, so I'm going to ask you to do this. You see? And basically what it meant is that I was putting God at my beck and call to do whatever I asked him to do. But secondly, that doesn't get me any closer to who God really is. In terms of, it doesn't get me any closer to understanding who Jesus is. You see? And so for all of you who said, no, the light shouldn't come on, you can clap yourselves. Well done. That's good. Well done. You see, and what we're going to see here is that we see exactly this happening in this story. Because after Jesus has fed all of this crowd, he then encounters the Pharisees. Let's pick up the story. After he had sent them away, he got into the boat with his disciples and went to the region of Dalmanutha. The Pharisees came and began to question Jesus. To test him, they asked him for a sign from heaven. He sighed deeply and said, "Why does this generation ask for a sign? Truly, I tell you, no sign will be given to it." Then he left them, got back into the boat, and crossed to the other side. And so we can see that the Pharisees were doing exactly the same thing. Jesus, we want a sign. We want you to prove yourself. We know already, listen, that they've got a bad attitude towards Jesus. Actually, at this point, they've already decided they want to get rid of him. So you wonder even why they're asking for a sign. But clearly, they want to say to Jesus, come on now, give us a sign. And what did Jesus do? No, I'm not going to give you a sign. I'm not going to play your game, because he looks into their hearts and he knows that they want proof, and that's going to remove any faith. And what we see at the heart of this story is they wanted to test rather than trust. Now listen, there's nothing wrong in coming to God in prayer. But what I was doing, I was testing God. I was saying, God, I'm going to test you. And that's very different from trusting God. God, I need you in this situation. I'm bringing this situation before you. You see, and what they hadn't realized is that the sign of Jesus was already in front of them. He was the sign. You see, and the reason that Jesus sighed and was so sad when they said this is because actually this happened time and time again. People came to him for healing. They came to him for this. They came to him for that. And they didn't come to him for who he was. They came to test him rather than to trust him. You might be thinking, well, that's not my problem. Actually, I've got past that phase. I'm not now testing God. I've moved beyond that. But actually, I've still got problems. I've encountered Jesus, but there are still problems in my life. There are still problems in my family. I've got health problems. I've got career problems. I've got work problems. Maybe you've brought your problem with you. Maybe you've left your problem in the workplace. I don't know what you've done with your problems, but we all have problems. Well, let me tell you, the disciples can relate to you because they also have a problem, as we see in the next part of this story. So let's pick up the story. The disciples had forgotten to bring bread, except for one loaf they had with them in the boat. Be careful, Jesus warned them. Watch out for the yeast of the Pharisees and that of Herod. They discussed this with one another and said, It is because we have no bread? Aware of their discussion, Jesus asked them, Why are you talking about having no bread? Do you still not see or understand? Are your hearts hardened? Do you have eyes but fail to see, and ears but fail to hear? And don't you remember? The disciples had forgotten to, when I broke the 5 loaves for the 5,000, how many basketfuls of pieces did you pick up? 12, they replied. And when I broke the 7 loaves for the 4,000, how many basketful of pieces did you pick up? They answered, 7. He said to them, Do you still not understand? So, we can see the disciples are in the boat. And it's a funny story because if you remember, Jesus has just multiplied all of these loaves. You know, there's been bread everywhere. Bread to the left, bread to the right, bread in front of them, bread behind them. And now they get in the boat and they have got 1 loaf because someone has forgotten to bring the bread. I don't know if that's ever happened to you. I remember once when we were going on holiday and we'd stopped halfway and we'd gone to the shops to buy all the resources, and you know, this is when we had 4 kids in the car and we'd crammed all the bags in the car, and then we get to where we're supposed to be going and then it's like, what happened to that 1 bag of food that we bought? And it was like, who? And then we suddenly realized it had got left at the checkout in the supermarket. And by this point, we traveled another hour and a half. So you're not going to go back another hour and a half just for a bag of food. And so you can imagine that, right, whose fault is this? Who didn't pick up that bag? You see, and of course, it was my fault because it's always my fault. No, I'm only joking. You see, but you can imagine the disciples are like, okay, Peter, you said you were getting it. No, don't be stupid. It was you, John. You were getting the bread. And then it's like, well, Judas, you're the one with the money. Why didn't you give us the money so we could get the bread? And you can imagine this going on. And Jesus is like incredulous. He's like, guys, don't you realize who's in the boat with you? I mean, you're like, why are they worried about 1 loaf of bread when the guy who's multiplied the loaves, he said, don't you remember how many baskets of bread? Not just once, but twice. And I was thinking, we can laugh at the disciples, but how true is that of us? When we get into a situation and we begin to worry about a problem, and we don't look back and think about how God has provided for us, how God has met us, how God has given us what we need. And in one sense, we can laugh at the disciples, but actually we need to recognize that actually that can be true for us again, because we get into another situation. Maybe it's a situation with someone and we don't know how to move forward. Maybe a situation at work, a situation about our future. And again, we can begin to worry and we can begin to play in our mind. And we can focus, in the same way that they focus, just go back to where we were, that previous slide. In the same way that we can focus on 1 loaf when the bread of life is in their boat, we can focus on the one thing rather than the Christ who is with us. And you see, when we lose sight of Christ, our problems become what we think about. Our problems become, in that sense, our whole vision. Now, I was remembering a song that, quite a famous song, and I know it's been a while since I've sung to you, so I thought I was long overdue. So let me just sing this little chorus. You may or may not know this song. So it goes like this. When did I start to forget all of the great things you did? When did I throw away faith for the impossible, the impossible? How did I start to believe You weren't sufficient for me. Why do I talk myself out of seeing miracles, seeing miracles? You see, and that's true, because this is exactly what can happen. You know, the disciples are there in the boat with their one loaf, worrying about it, and they've forgotten already all the great things you did. Don't you remember? 12 baskets, 7 baskets. Have you thrown away faith for the impossible? Don't you know who you're with? Do you remember how the chorus goes of that song? You are more than able. Do-do-do, 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 do-do-do. You are more than able. Who am I to deny what the Lord can do? Oh, I don't know about you, but I've got to sing myself that song to me quite a few times, because just like the disciples, we can let the problem that we're facing encompass the vision that we have. And the heart of that passage also is a stark warning to us and to the disciples. And you may have missed that warning, because Jesus goes on to say, watch out for the yeast of the Pharisees and of Herod. Watch out for the yeast and the Pharisees and that of Herod. Now, I'd like to consider myself a little bit of a yeast expert. I've now been a bread baker for about 20 years. And so I just want to give you 2 or 3 of the lessons that I've learned about yeast. You see, one thing about yeast is, firstly, it works quietly. When you put yeast in dough, you cannot hear it. It makes no noise whatsoever. But what is happening is it's spreading gradually throughout the dough. And let me tell you one other thing, because often I've put that bread machine on in the mornings for the dough to rise, and I forgot to tell someone at home that I'd done it. And so I'd get back, and suddenly this thing would have been left the whole day, and the whole loaf the whole piece of dough would have been absolutely ruined. You see? And so what Jesus is doing, he's basically saying to the disciples, watch out. There is something that can work quietly. There is something that can spread gradually. And there's something that, if left unchecked, can ruin everything. So what is that? Well, if we think about the Pharisees there, we can see they were demanding proof. They were walking in unbelief. They were focusing on external rituals. They were demanding signs. If we think about Herod, he was after power. He was after wealth. And in one sense, when we think about unbelief, we can think it's about not believing in something. But actually, unbelief is also belief in the wrong thing. It's where our focus, our vision is fixed on the wrong thing. For the Pharisees, it wasn't on Jesus. It was about on keeping the law, that external rituals. And they come, and now they're demanding signs, even though I don't think they're going to believe in him. For Herod, it's going to be power and wealth. And you see, each one of these things, if that becomes our focus, it's going to work quietly in our life. It's going to spread gradually in our life. And if left unchecked, it ruins everything. Again, let's take one example, position. So easy to be someone who seeks position. You know, I know everyone likes to move up the triangle of life, you know, to get a new letter, whether it's to move from a P1 to a D1 to a Z2 to an R2, D2. I don't know what letters you're chasing at the moment, you see. And over time, what can be a good and noble thing to work hard can spread gradually. And left unchecked, it can become all-consuming. You begin worried about, why is this person moved up the ladder when I'm far better than they are, you see? And so Jesus is saying, beware what clouds your vision of me. Again, for those of you who know, when we think about the questions he asked as well, it's super important. Do you see the questions he asked them? He said, do you still not see or understand? Are your hearts hardened? Do you have eyes but fail to see, ears but fail to hear? And don't you remember? And so what Jesus says is, when we have got the wrong vision, it can do a number of things. Firstly, it can harden our hearts. It can deafen us. It can blind us. And we don't remember. And so Jesus is saying, you have to be super careful what you place in front of you. What is your vision in life? What you are chasing after. Because without realizing it, it can begin to harden our hearts to the Lord. When we think about any different area, it can begin to become our focus, and it can harden our hearts. Whether it's a relationship, we can put that as the main thing. And Jesus is set to one side, and his voice becomes less important. The revelation of who he is becomes less important. For those of you who know C.S. Lewis, who wrote The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, he wrote a number of other books as well. And one of the most famous ones was called the Screwtape Letters. And it was basically written where two devils are writing to each other. So there's a junior devil and a senior devil. And so the idea is that the junior devil is now in training to try and tempt and trap people. And so he's getting advice from the senior devil in terms of how to go about tempting people. And I love this piece of advice because I think it's so true. It says, it's funny how mortals always picture us as putting things into their minds. He says, in reality, our best work is done by keeping things out. By keeping things out. It's so easy to go through life and let the things of God pass us by. Another day goes by, and we haven't had a chance to reflect on Jesus, to read his word. We haven't had a chance to maybe come before him in prayer, to keep him central in our vision as we move forward. And so what's the solution? Well, let's come to the last verses that we're reading today, because we realize that the Pharisees are blind to who Jesus is. They've got the wrong vision. Even the disciples, they've got the wrong vision. And so picking up the story, the last 4 verses we're reading today. They came to Bethsaida, and some people brought a blind man and begged Jesus to touch him. He took the blind man by the hand and led him outside the village. When he had spit on the man's eyes and put his hands on him, Jesus asked, "Do you see anything?" He looked up and said, "I see people. They look like trees walking around." Once more, Jesus put his hands on the man's eyes. Then his eyes were opened. His sight was restored, and he saw everything clearly. Now, this is the only one of the 4 Gospels that this story occurs in. And also, it is the only time in the whole of the healing miracles of Jesus when Jesus fails to heal on the first attempt. Because did you see that? Jesus prayed, and the guy who was blind, it can begin to see a little blurry, and then Jesus has to pray for him a second time. So, here's what I want you to do. Turn to your neighbor. Okay? Turn to your neighbor, find a neighbor, turn to your neighbor, and say, why did Jesus fail to heal the first time? He's the Son of God, for goodness sake. And yet he didn't. He failed to heal the first time. Why did Jesus fail to heal the first time? So turn to your neighbor and see what they have to say. Jane, if you could pass that microphone. Wesley, you can be my runner. You can be my runner. Okay. Why did Jesus fail to heal the first time? Wesley, you can go and pick on some people. They didn't even need to put their hands up. Wesley's coming for you guys. You better have an answer. So,
maybe the man didn't have enough faith.
Okay, so maybe he was a faithless man because he needed more faith for that healing. Okay, so that's one good option. So,
Jesus didn't fail. What happened is that he wanted to communicate something, and from today's topic, it means like, what are you seeing? So the man had to explain what he's seeing. So for him to get full healing, Jesus had to do it that way.
Okay, so there's a lesson, there's some form of lesson here about what do you see. So, which maybe he could have done even just by healing him the first time, and then he could have asked the same question, what did you see? So,
the man didn't have enough faith.
Okay, so not enough faith. Okay. Any more options? Only short answers accepted.
Like a lot of healings, it's meant to be an illustration to show what Jesus is doing. And so the disciples kind of grasped Jesus, just like the person kind of saw, but they've yet to see Jesus fully.
Okay. Okay, any more final offers? Any more final hands in the air? Okay, well, thank you very much. Just give yourself a little clap there for... So, in one sense, what we see here is we see three stages, don't we? So we see him blindness, blurred vision, and then clear vision. Now, if we think about what's just happened in the story, we can see the Pharisees are totally blind to who Jesus is. You see, they're not willing to see him. They don't want to see him. They are totally blind to who he is. Whereas the disciples, we begin to they're partially blind, but also we're going to see, especially as we come on to next week, how they're beginning to have some sort of blurred vision in terms of who this is. They haven't fully got it, but they're beginning to piece things together. And finally, we get to this stage of where there's clear vision of who Jesus is. Now, if we think about that, here we see the whole of the gospel. Because actually, why has Jesus come? He said, at the beginning of John's gospel, it talks about he is the light that has come into the world, the light that shines in the darkness, and he is the light of mankind. You see, and what that's saying is basically is that we need his light. If we're going to understand this thing called life, if we're going to understand how we're to live this thing called life, then actually we need God's light to come into our lives. Otherwise, we're going to be doing it by ourselves without any vision and without any direction. And so, in that sense, even I know, as I was growing up, I had no light. To me, Jesus was maybe a historical character. He didn't mean anything. And so I was blind to who he was. And then over time, that vision began to fall into place. I began to realize there was someone called Jesus. Maybe I hadn't really understood why he'd come. Maybe I thought he'd come just for me to make me happy. But then there came a point in time where that revelation came, where that light was shone into my life. And I realized that he wasn't just an historical figure, but he was the Savior of the world, that he was the King of kings, and he was the Lord of lords. You see, and so this journey from blindness to blurred vision to having vision, it doesn't just happen when you become a believer, because we can lose that vision of Jesus along the way. Our vision can get caught up with other things. Our vision can get caught up with our problems, just like the disciples had in so many ways. And so this sense of, Lord, give me new light on who you are in the situation that I'm in. Now, finally, as we come to a close, what's super interesting in that story is it doesn't just say, and the guy saw. Because it would have been very easy to say, Jesus prayed and the guy saw. But he says here, there's three things that happen. Once more, Jesus put his hands on the man's eyes. Then his eyes were opened, his sight was restored, and he saw everything clearly. And you see, those three phases are super important. The first one, eyes were opened. You see, that needs to happen to each one of us, and sometimes again and again, where we haven't seen Jesus clearly for who he is. And then suddenly there comes a moment of revelation where we see him for who he is, where we understand that he's in control. Whatever situation we may be in, he's ruling and he's reigning. We don't have to worry. And then we see that the sight was restored. And what that means is now you can begin to see things clearly. It's not just that moment coming, but now you can begin to make things out as they really are. Your sight is restored. And so, for example, when you think about your job, it's no longer your job. You're realizing it's his job because he's in charge of that. When it comes to your resources, it's no longer your resources. It's his resources because you're realizing that he's over all these things. When it comes to your family, it's no longer you by yourself. You're realizing that he's the one that's in control. And then he saw everything clearly. He saw everything clearly. And so now as you look out on the world, Even maybe when you're going for a walk, you see a tree, you're thinking, Jesus made that tree because he was there at the beginning and he's there at the end. When you look at your body, you can think, Jesus made this body and he's in control of this body, so I can trust him with this body. When you think about your future, you can think, he's in charge of that future. We can trust him. You see, and I was thinking about this as we close. You see, in each one of these areas, whether it's relationships, marriage, parenting, rest, finances, we can make this the problem. We can focus on this. We can make the same mistake even the disciples were doing when they were focusing on the one loaf. But actually, Jesus is saying, no, I want to give you vision for each of these areas. I want you to realize that you can trust me in each of these areas of your life. And actually, this is what the disciples needed to do, and even the Pharisees needed to do, and we need to do, because we can let each one of these areas become a problem that we need to fix, rather than Jesus is saying, listen, I'm the Lord of this problem. I am bigger than this problem. You can trust me with this problem. Why? Because I am the Christ. I'm the God of this problem. You know, and I was thinking, some of us today, I don't know what we're facing, what we're worrying about. Maybe like the disciples, we've forgotten that who's in our boat with us. Because problems are real, aren't they? You know, they don't just go away. Sometimes problems can be short-term, sometimes they can be long-term. But for each one of us, we need to pray this prayer. And I guess when I was preparing today, my prayer for you was that your eyes would be opened. Whatever is in your current focus, your eyes would be open to who Jesus is, and that you would know that he is in charge, that he is not leaving you, he is on the throne, and you can trust him. Secondly, your sight would be restored, so that you could see things clearly in terms of what he has done. And then finally, you could see everything clearly. Well, I want to pray for us this morning. And I want to pray especially for our ability to see Jesus clearly. So I just want to invite us to stand this morning as we come to a close. And listen, if you're around on Tuesday, I'd love to unpack these things more. It's an amazing passage in terms of thinking about what Christ has done for us. And one of the things I was sensing this morning is sometimes we need the Lord to see the Lord more clearly. We need to see the Lord more clearly in a situation. And sometimes what that means is we've been looking at the wrong thing. Maybe we've been worried about something. And so what I just want to invite you to do is, in the same way that Jesus prayed for this man's sight, the disciples needed sight, the Pharisees needed sight, I just want to invite you just to put your hands on your eyes, just as a sign of, Lord, I want to pray that you would help me see with your eyes who you are. I just want to give a moment of quiet now. The Lord knows where you need sight. Maybe it's as a husband. Maybe it's in your workplace. Maybe it's for your future. And Jesus is saying, I want to give you a fresh revelation of who I am, that I can be trusted. Let's just spend a moment in quiet. Jesus, I want to pray for each person who's here this morning. It's so easy to have our eyes fixed on other things. Jesus, I want to pray that you would continue to open our eyes to who you are. Open our eyes to all that you've done. Father, forgive us when we can forget that you walk with us. I want to pray for each person here that you would give them a fresh vision of who you are. Whatever they may be facing right now, that they would know that you're in control and that you can be trusted. And I pray these things in Jesus' name. Amen.